And once you see that structure, you start understanding the real game. So stay alert, stay analytical, because this isn't just about protests anymore. It's about power, leverage, and global positioning. If you've made it this far, you already understand that something bigger is unfolding. And if you want to keep tracking it, stay connected with ANC News. Because what we are witnessing is not an isolated event. It's part of a larger shift in how power operates in the modern world. And the most important part? This is just the beginning. The geopolitical chess match is only starting to unfold, and every move from here will matter. ANC News will continue tracking every development. The White House publicly blames Democrats for prolonging what had already become a record-breaking Department of Homeland Security shutdown, while House Republicans rejected a Senate compromise bill that, on paper, looked like a temporary solution. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't just a disagreement over funding numbers. This was a standoff over leverage. DHS isn't just another department. It controls border security, immigration enforcement, airport screening, cyber defense, and critical infrastructure protection. Shutting it down doesn't just disrupt operations, it creates visible pressure points across the entire country. Now think about the timing. Late March isn't random. This is the period when fiscal projections for Q2 start solidifying, when markets begin adjusting expectations for interest rates, and when global energy demand patterns shift ahead of summer. At the exact same time, tensions with Iran were escalating in the Strait of Hormuz, pushing oil prices upward. So you have a domestic security shutdown happening simultaneously with rising geopolitical risk in one of the world's most critical oil choke points. That overlap matters more than it seems. Let's go back a few weeks. Around mid-February 2026, early warning signs were already visible. Congressional negotiations were stalling, but markets remained relatively calm. Investors assumed, as they often do, that a last-minute deal would prevent anything serious. But by March 10th, when Senate negotiators introduced a compromise bill, the tone had shifted. The bill proposed partial funding extensions with specific allocations for border enforcement and cybersecurity. It wasn't perfect, but it was designed to buy time. Then, on March 28th, House Republicans rejected it outright. That decision didn't just extend the shutdown, it escalated it. Here's where the strategic layer comes into focus. By rejecting a compromise, House Republicans effectively forced the White House into a public blame game, and the White House responded immediately, placing responsibility on Democrats. This creates a three-way narrative conflict, where each side is speaking not just to each other, but to voters, markets, and international observers. Because perception here is power. But it gets worse. The longer the DHS shutdown continues, the more pressure builds in very specific sectors. TSA agents, many of whom are working without full pay, begin to call in sick or leave. Airport delays increase. Cargo inspections slow down. Supply chains start to feel friction. Now connect that to the broader economy. The U.S. relies heavily on efficient logistics. Even small disruptions can ripple outward. By March 29th, early reports suggested increased wait times at major hubs like Atlanta, Dallas, and Los Angeles. That's not just inconvenience, that's economic drag. And while all of this is happening, financial markets are quietly repositioning. Treasury yields have been fluctuating, with the 10-year hovering around 4.3%. Mortgage rates have climbed above 6.5%, making housing even less accessible. Meanwhile, investors are moving capital into safer assets like gold and US dollars. Think about that. A domestic political standoff is influencing global capital flows. That's leverage. Now let's connect the dots internationally. As the US deals with internal gridlock, Iran is testing the limits in the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping insurance costs are rising. Oil futures have surged past $95 per barrel. Countries like China and India, heavily dependent on imported energy, are watching closely. Russia, already benefiting from higher energy prices, gains additional revenue. So, who benefits financially from this chaos? Energy exporters, defense contractors, and certain financial institutions positioned for volatility. That's not speculation, that's pattern recognition. But here's the deeper question. Is the shutdown simply a byproduct of political disagreement, or is it being used as a tool? Because when you create instability in a critical department like DHS, you also create urgency. And urgency can justify policy shifts that would otherwise face resistance. Increased border funding, expanded surveillance measures, cybersecurity investments, these are all on the table. And in a high-pressure environment, decisions get made faster. Now let's talk about leverage. In any negotiation, the side that can more pressure usually wins. By allowing the shutdown to continue, each political faction is testing the limits of public tolerance. How long before airport disruptions become unacceptable? How long before economic indicators start flashing red? How long before voters demand a resolution? These aren't abstract questions, they're strategic calculations. Here's where it gets even more complex. The US is not operating in isolation. NATO allies are watching. European markets are already dealing with energy uncertainty. If the US appears unstable internally, it weakens its negotiating position globally. And that has real consequences. Trade talks, defense agreements, diplomatic negotiations, all of these are influenced by perceptions of stability and control. Now consider the next 3 to 6 months. If the shutdown extends into April and potentially May, you're looking at second-order effects. Consumer confidence could drop, travel demand could decline, corporate earnings forecasts may be revised downward. At the same time, if tensions with Iran escalate further, the US may need to project military strength in the region. But how do you maintain a strong external posture while dealing with internal dysfunction? That's a strategic dilemma. And this is exactly why you need to pay attention to how the narrative is being shaped. Because narratives influence markets, and markets influence policy. The White House blaming Democrats isn't just about assigning faults. It's about controlling the story. House Republicans rejecting the Senate bill isn't just about policy. It's about forcing a confrontation. And Democrats resisting certain provisions isn't just about principles. It's about long-term positioning. If you're following this kind of deep analysis, make sure you're subscribed to ANC News, because these are the patterns most people miss. Now let's bring in another layer. The upcoming deadlines. Early April marks a critical window for budget revisions and economic forecasts. At the same time, there are scheduled international meetings, including energy coordination talks among major economies. If the US enters those discussions with an unresolved shutdown, its negotiating power is reduced. That's not theory. That's how diplomacy works. Think about that. Domestic gridlock translating into global disadvantage. And yet, some actors may see this as an acceptable trade-off if it leads to stronger leverage in internal negotiations. That's the paradox. Now let's ask the uncomfortable question. Who actually benefits from prolonging the crisis? Politically, each side believes it can gain by holding out. Economically, certain sectors profit from volatility. Strategically, the crisis creates opportunities to push through changes under pressure. But for the average citizen, the costs are immediate. Delays, uncertainty, rising prices. And here's where the story shifts from analysis to implication. Because if this pattern continues, it sets a precedent. Future negotiations may follow the same playbook. Create pressure, control the narrative, force a resolution under urgency. That's not just politics, that's strategy. Now imagine where this leads by mid-2026. If economic indicators weaken while geopolitical tensions remain high, the Federal Reserve may face conflicting pressures. Do they cut rates to support growth, or keep them high to control inflation driven by energy prices? That decision alone could reshape global markets. And all of this traces back, in part, to what's happening right now with the DHS shutdown. Here's where it gets even more critical. There's an unspoken deadline forming. Not an official one, but a practical one. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to reverse the damage without significant concessions. That means the eventual deal, whenever it comes, is likely to include elements that would have been rejected under normal circumstances. That's the power of prolonged pressure. So as you watch the headlines, ask yourself this: are you seeing a breakdown or a negotiation strategy playing out in real time? Are these events disconnected or part of a larger pattern of leverage and control? Because once you start connecting these dots, it becomes very difficult to see this as just another political dispute. And if you want to stay ahead of these developments as they unfold, make sure you're following ANC News, because this situation is evolving fast, and the implications are far from over. As we move into April, all eyes will be on whether a breakthrough happens or whether the standoff intensifies. Watch the markets. Watch energy prices. Watch international reactions. These are the signals that reveal what's really happening beneath the surface. Because this isn't just about a shutdown. It's about power, timing, and strategy at the highest level. And the most important thing to understand is this: whatever resolution comes next will not be the end of the story. It will be the beginning of the next phase. The geopolitical chess match is already in motion, and this DHS shutdown is just one move on the board. The real question is what comes next, and who is truly in control of the outcome. One thing is certain: this is just the beginning, and ANC News will continue tracking every development.